We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 10th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, Turkey's authoritarian clampdown on opposition politicians continues. We'll ask if the country can still be called a democracy. Then,
I recognise that there are members who may not have signed this motion, but who do have legitimate concerns about some of the issues it raises.
That's Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, who faces a confidence vote today. Although expected to survive, what does this tell us about the internal fractures within the bloc? We'll look at Ukraine's recovery conference in Rome. We'll cross to Indonesia to find out more about tariff negotiations. And,
well, the shoe is on the other foot now. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency will tailor intelligence to please the president. He has done so.
We'll ask why the CIA keeps making the same mistakes for the same reasons. And finally, we examine a project to archive Dutch nightlife. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. South Korea's former president Yoon Suk-yeol is back in a solitary jail cell today after a court issued a new detention warrant as prosecutors investigate his botched attempt to impose martial law last year. US President Donald Trump launched his global tariff assault into overdrive on Wednesday, announcing a new 50% tariff on US copper imports and a 50% duty on goods from Brazil, both to start on August the 1st. And Taiwan's army displayed the firepower of its first US-sourced Abrams tank today, a traditional weapon that analysts say will need to be increasingly protected against drones in any future battle, given lessons from the Ukraine war. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the political crackdown in Turkey is intensifying. Over the weekend, President Erdoğan authorised the arrest of 3 more mayors from the main opposition Republican People's Party, which governs many of Turkey's largest cities. That's been followed by an official investigation into the party's leader, accused of insulting the president, and fresh restrictions on social media. Critics say the moves are part of a sweeping effort to silence dissent and shore up power ahead of the next election. But with protests continuing and the economy wobbling, can the opposition survive the pressure? And what's left of Turkish democracy if it doesn't? Jared Malsin, who's Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, joins us now from Istanbul. Jared, many thanks for coming on the show. Why were these mayors arrested now, and how has this been justified by the authorities?
Well, as you said, this follows the arrest of Istanbul's mayor in March. That mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, is the nominee of the Republican People's Party, the CHP, to potentially challenge President Erdoğan in a presidential election. What the authorities are saying now is that these arrests across the country are part of a wider criminal investigation that started with this same corruption investigation in Istanbul. And what they're alleging is that there is a wider criminal conspiracy that all of these people are a part of, now including the mayors of 3 important cities. That's Adana, which is the country's 5th largest city, Antalya, which is a well-known resort town, and of course Adıyaman, which is a larger city in eastern Turkey. So it's a widening of the clampdown. going after more of the sort of institutional body of the CHP.
So, I mean, it looks like it's a coordinated effort to dismantle their local power, right?
That is what CHP people will tell you. What's at stake here is that the opposition's control over these municipalities is an important part of their power and influence in Turkish politics in general. Turkey is still a democracy in the sense that elections are transparent here. It's very difficult to rig elections. And in the last local election last year, the CHP dealt a huge setback to the AKP, and they took control of many of the largest cities in the country. That includes Ankara, Istanbul, Izmir, and control over those municipalities means resources. It means financial resources. It means access to different kinds of institutional clout that you wouldn't otherwise have. And if they lose control of these cities, that would start to fade away. So, yeah, go ahead.
There's an official investigation been launched into the party leader. What more do we know about that?
Well, right. Well, so this is a new investigation that is, again, coming on top of this separate corruption investigation in which he's being investigated for a variety of alleged crimes, including insulting the president. And what this seems to be is just, adding on more aspects to this legal clampdown on the CHP in general.
So there's also been a tightening of regulations on or outright banning of social media platforms. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, right. There has been a restrictive approach to social media and to the internet in general in Turkey. For years, it is part of the government's way of handling things. This week, notably, Turkey became the first to actually ban the AI aspect of X, the so-called Grok platform, following the controversy there. It's one example. During the arrest of Imamoglu in March, the authorities throttled access to Twitter and Instagram to prevent information from being spread. And at different points, Imamoglu, the opposition leader, his accounts have been suspended as well. So,
how are people reacting on the streets?
The protests, so to begin with, after the arrest in March of the Istanbul mayor, there were huge protests here in Istanbul and across the country. Hundreds of thousands of people, probably more, filling the streets. Those protests have resumed this week to some extent. There were protests here in Istanbul last night. The question now is, can the opposition mount a challenge either in the streets or in the court system that will substantively stop this?
What are the options for the opposition?
Well, that's a huge question, really. In an environment where the government and the authorities have control over important institutions like the judiciary, they are holding a lot of the cards here. Opposition people will tell you they cannot really count on much support from anyone in the judicial system. The government, of course, will deny this and say that the judiciary is independent. So it really boils down to a question of, can they mobilize enough support in the streets to get the government to back down? And I think we did see some of that in March, where, for example, there were certain steps that the government could have taken. For example, they could have installed their own mayor, a kind of trustee, to take over the Istanbul municipality and really take it away from the opposition, which is something that they stopped short of. It was rumored to potentially happen, and they didn't do that. And again, we have to see kind of how far this goes. Another important opposition leader is Mansur Yavaş, the mayor of Ankara, who is again, one of the more prominent faces of opposition politics in Turkey. He is still in his seat. He is still serving as the mayor of Ankara. So, there's still other steps that they can take, other areas that the government could go that, there is a push and pull here. There's a dynamic to this situation where they're not doing this without meeting some resistance.
Tell me, what shape is the economy in?
That's an important question because this is all happening in an environment where Turkey has been struggling with its economy for the last several years now. It's been trapped in a sort of cycle of a deflating currency and high inflation, where right now inflation in Turkey is somewhere above 30%, which is down from what it's been in the last several years, where you had inflation at times, soaring up to 70 and 80%, according to the official government statistics. According to the independent economists, that number actually was more than 100% at times in the last couple of years. And what that means basically is that the cost of living is soaring. Ordinary people are struggling to make ends meet, to buy food, and the just quality of life for ordinary Turkish people has really crashed in the last few years. People are taking on second and third jobs. They are cutting back on things that used to be normal, like buying meat, buying vegetables. And that's part of the political situation that the government is in. The fact that they suffered a setback in the local elections was in large part because voters were punishing them for their economic situation. And the country has stepped back from the brink of a much more serious financial crisis, that could actually, like a balance of payments crisis or something like that. The finance minister, Mehmet Şimşek, who's widely respected by the markets, he has instituted a series of policies that have stabilized the economy. But that said, at a kind of street level, ordinary people are still suffering from this. So,
Jared, many thanks to you. That's Jared Melson, the Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. And this is The Globalist. It's 8:12 in Strasbourg, 7:12 here in London. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, is expected to survive a no-confidence vote in the European Parliament today. But the very fact it's happening reveals deep cracks inside the EU's political centre. The motion has been tabled by a far-right MEP, yet it's von der Leyen's own centrist group that's under fire for voting alongside those same hard-right factions during last month's parliamentary scramble. The vote won't remove her, but it raises serious questions about the future of her coalition, the credibility of pro-European politics, and the EU's ability to hold a united line as it faces down growing pressure from Russia, China, and possibly Trump too. I'm joined by Sarah Wheaton, Chief Policy Correspondent for Politico Europe and co-author of the Brussels Playbook. Sarah, many thanks for coming on the show. I understand that you're actually joining us from Strasbourg, where the European Parliament in session. What's the mood ahead of the vote?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Right now, the Ursula von der Leyen's political family, the centre-right European People's Party, they're feeling pretty good. They're like, you know what, we've got this contained, it's under control. Everybody who's taking it seriously is ridiculous, and we're fine. The center-left family, the one that she needs to work most closely with, is feeling pretty good because they claim that they've gotten her to make a concession in exchange for them to back the continuation of her commission, whereas everybody else is actually feeling pretty grim because they've realized they don't actually have much leverage.
So just unpick who brought this motion and why it's being seen as more than just a fringe protest.
So the motion was brought by Gheorghe Peparea, who's a Romanian member of the European Parliament. He's from the European Conservatives and Reformists. This is actually the political faction founded by the Tories when the UK was still part of the EU. So they're quite conservative, but they're not, universally considered fringe, even though that's now how this motion is being presented. He's from one of the more fringy, let's say, parts of that group, but he tabled this basically to say, look, Ursula von der Leyen has been bypassing the European Parliament on spending issues related to defense when she shouldn't be. And also he had concerns about her level of transparency stemming from her refusal to share text messages with the CEO of Pfizer during coronavirus vaccine negotiations.
So von der Leyen's part of the European People's Party, the centre-right bloc. Why has her group's cooperation with the far-right parties caused such outrage?
Well, the centrist coalition that has long governed Brussels is basically saying, look, you're breaking through this firewall with the far right. It's also called the cordon sanitaire. And they're saying any collaboration with these groups is really tantamount to a betrayal. They're saying they're the ones who helped, who voted for her to continue as the European Commission president, and that she needs to continue to respect this coalition. However, the reality is that the coalitions at the European level are much less formal. People on the center right say, look, we're the kingmakers. Voters gave these far-right parties a lot more seats in the last European Parliament election, and especially for things like migration, for things like rolling back climate legislation, it makes more sense for us to collaborate with them.
Do we expect any significant defections in the vote itself, or will her survival just paper over the deeper split?
Yeah, her survival was never really in question because it would take a 2/3 majority of MEPs voting for the vote of no confidence in order to cause problems for her. The center-left groups were threatening to abstain, which would have been embarrassing, but not actually a real problem. That said, the Socialists and Democrats have gotten her to agree to protect. We're in the middle of major EU budget negotiations right now. They got her to agree to protect their kind of top priority called the European Social Fund. Some people say they would have gotten this anyway, but it's sort of a pound of flesh that they can claim to have extracted from her. That said, look, the coalition is increasingly volatile. We're seeing the same trends of polarization in Brussels that we're seeing in many national capitals, and European politics is about to get rockier going forward.
The motion's unlikely to pass, but is it damaging enough to weaken von der Leyen's future?
She's in the middle of her second term, so we can say that she's safe. It's more that her second term is really only just getting started. We're only 1 year into it. And if she wants to pass major legislation, including this budget measure that I mentioned, including major migration overhaul, she'll need a bit more of a stable coalition than what she has. And instead, now we're going to see a real brawl for every single bill.
And do you think this is just internal drama, or does it have wider consequences for the EU's cohesion on issues like defence or Ukraine or enlargement? How is it being viewed in Strasbourg, where you are now?
I think it does have broader significance because usually there's sort of this slow but consensus-based process that leads to legislation at the European level, and that has maybe made it look opaque and undemocratic. But it does mean things actually get done, and they usually get done, and you could argue a pretty thoughtful way. Whereas now, again, we're going to see more kind of partisan, left-right culture war elements applied to every single piece of legislation. Now, this could actually make the EU more democratically responsive, but again, as we've seen in many capitals, right now being democratically responsive often means gridlock.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. That's Sarah Wheaton, Chief Policy Correspondent for Politico Europe and co-author of the Brussels Playbook. Now, still to come on the show.
It's amazing to see the private businesses in Ukraine continuing to invest, to project, to project themselves in the future, to keep the capacity.
We'll have a look at the Ukraine Recovery Conference. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates. each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. And joining us down the line from Nairobi is our correspondent in the city, Navina Couture. Good morning to you, Navina.
Good morning, Georgina.
Just before we go into the headlines, can you tell me what's the situation in Nairobi now? Of course, we know that there have been protests in the last few days.
Yes, I think the city has gone back to normal for a couple of days. People are taking stock of the damages, both the personal damages, but also the economic damages that have occurred. And I think we will see how the politicians respond to this. But President Ruto has said he wants to, instead of shooting people to kill, he has suggested shooting people in the leg. So I'm not entirely sure we can talk about de-escalation here.
That's extraordinary, encouraging people to be shot at all. Let's talk about the 5 African leaders who are attending a landmark summit on trade, investment and security in Washington, D.C. Now, we know, of course, that US President Donald Trump really in the past has been quite vocal about the fact that he doesn't much rate Africa, but he suddenly seems to have become aware of the potential of mineral wealth from the continent. Who's there and what does he want?
Yes, I think this is all part of this new Africa policy that's all about trade, not aid. So for the next 3 days, Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia and Mauritania and Senegal are being hosted in Washington. There was a big lunch. I think it's fair to describe it as a bit of a charade because some of these leaders were complimenting him on his golf skills and suggesting he should build a golf course in Senegal, for example. Some of them were suggesting he should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, something that we know he's very keen on. But as you just said, I think this is very much about a possible access for the to natural resources and rare minerals, especially in places like Gabon. But also, I think it's an opportunity for African leaders who are very concerned about facing tariffs and also the end of a preferential trade agreement between the US and African countries to negotiate, I think, a better trade agreement so that they're not kind of surprised by slightly erratic announcements in the middle of the night in Washington.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that is very important that is being reported by the Wall Street Journal exclusively is that the United States has sent a proposal to these 5 countries as a push to deport migrants from the United States to these countries, expecting them to accept deportees.
Let's look to South Africa now and Ramaphosa responding to US tariffs.
Yes, I think we have a bit of a theme here this week around how African governments are going to negotiate with, this U.S. government that comes up with different tariff agreements, different trade agreements. And as you know, the United States is the second biggest market for South African products. The United States want to impose 25% tariffs on steel, aluminium and vehicles. So the president and the government are trying to avert this. He says he's contesting the interpretation of the trade balance. And Ramaphosa is also saying he actually hasn't received any information from the negotiating teams on the US side as to what exactly, as to the numbers, as to how they want to apply this. So again, the biggest economy on the continent trying to sort of figure out to maneuver this new US trade policy.
Extraordinary stuff. And I mean, Ramaphosa's got huge problems of his own.
Yes, exactly. I mean, his coalition government is not exactly stable. Every 2 months, I think we're on the verge of announcing a breakdown of the government and the possibility of him having to enter a minority government. One of the biggest banks in the country, Standard Chartered, has actually warned about the impact these tariffs will have, not just on the economy, but also on the financial system. So I think there is real concern in South Africa about what this could mean if the tariffs are actually imposed host.
Now, let's have a look at the race to produce hydrogen in Africa. Kenya, Namibia and South Africa are all trying to launch hydrogen businesses. Tell us more.
Yes. South Africa, look, this is a big priority for African governments. I think it has to do with what happened after the war in Ukraine and Russia broke out, that the country was left without fertilizer, was left without gas, and kind of exposed to this global economy that was very much focused on what was coming out of Ukraine and Russia. There is a real push in these big economies, Kenya and South Africa, but also Namibia, to produce hydrogen partly for export to Europe. The German government was really pursuing these kind of trade deals and investing in plants, but also to produce fertilizer for domestic consumption. So I think there is now a big project, $5.8 billion being planned in South Africa. The plan is to produce 1 million tons of ammonia in the country, but also Kenya is looking to Japan, to Australia for investment to produce hydrogen here. And similar talks are happening between the German government and Namibia. And I think it's a sort of new field that is going to be very important, that a lot of people say will become more important as people are trying to adjust to the challenges that come with climate change. And I think this is a field that these African countries are really trying to kind of get ahead in.
Now, speaking of Namibia, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is there at the moment. What's he after?
Well, I know I sound a bit like a broken record today, but he seems to be after critical minerals, uranium, and just overall access to this market. He's in Namibia to talk about that. He visited Ghana before. I think there's a sense that India sort of neglected the ties to Africa and to these African countries in the past, and is playing a bit of catch up compared to China, compared to the Gulf countries, compared to Turkey. And so Mr. Modi was on a sort of, tour of Africa to help boost ties between the continent. I think the Indian companies are already very dominant when it comes to cars, when it comes to medical supplies. But obviously, as we all know, these critical minerals are essential for electric vehicles and all the other things that the global economy needs to transition from a fuel-based economy. And that's what he's doing here.
And there's also many Indian diamond processing companies there, and I think that he's particularly interested in diamonds.
Yes, that's one of the products or issues he's discussing is where he's talking to Indian diamond processing companies that are already operating in Namibia, and apparently they're prepared to invest around $800 million in Namibia across sectors, including mining, manufacturing, in a sort of push to get better access to minerals, but also diamonds, and I think overall boost the presence on the continent.
Navina, thank you very much indeed. That's Navina Katur, who's Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. South Korea's former president, Yoon Suk-yeol, is back in a solitary jail cell today after a court issued a new detention warrant as prosecutors investigate his botched attempt to impose martial law last year. Marking a dramatic fall from grace, Yoon spent 52 days in the Seoul detention centre before being released on technical grounds. He's currently on trial to decide whether he committed insurrection with his bid to declare martial law on December the 3rd, an allegation he denies. US President Donald Trump launched his global tariff assault into overdrive on Wednesday, announcing a new 50% tariff on US copper imports and a 50% duty on goods from Brazil, both to start on August the 1st. The announcement came hours after he also informed Brazil that its reciprocal tariff on August the 1st would rise to 50% from 10%, a shockingly high level for a country with a balanced US trade relationship. And Taiwan's army displayed the firepower of its first US-sourced Abrams tanks today, a traditional weapon that analysts say will need to be increasingly protected against drones in any future battle, given lessons from the Ukraine war. 4 Abrams tanks were shown manoeuvring across a mud-choked army training ground, firing at moving and static targets on the second day of Taiwan's annual military exercises that are designed to test the island's resilience in a conflict with China. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind the headlines, here's Chris Chermak on the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome.
Volodymyr Zelensky is among those attending the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome, the 4th iteration of an annual summit that aims to help Ukraine rebuild its country in a time of war. This one comes at an especially critical time as Russia pounds Ukraine with record drone and missile strikes each night, while foreign aid from the United States and others is in question. All of this means the private sector needs to step up. Investors will be looking at the Rome conference to see how they can get their hands on funds from a minerals deal that the US reached with Ukraine earlier this year. Meanwhile, there are already development banks operating in Ukraine, hoping to leverage the private sector by picking up some of the bill.
For a bank, investing in a war zone is challenging. So it took, a few months to discuss with the shareholders and so forth to find the right approach.
This is Odile Renaud-Bassot, president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The bank, founded after the Cold War to help reconstruct post-Soviet states, has loaned out more than 7 billion euros in Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion, picking up about 50% of the risk tab for loans to Ukrainian companies in a bid to keep private investors involved.
It's amazing to see the private businesses in Ukraine continuing to invest, to project, to project themselves in the future, to keep the capacity.
Renaud-Bassot, a French economist, says that the EBRD cannot replace the role played by foreign development aid and appeals for governments to remain involved. But she does stress that the EBRD and other development banks are a key tool for countries like Ukraine because they can take a small amount of funding and leverage it for more in the private sector.
Everybody realizes how it's important for when ODA, so development assistance, is becoming scarce. The capacity to work with the private sector, attract private investment, is seen as a very important element for development, and that's why the EBRD model has been so relevant.
For Monocle, I'm Chris Chermak.
Thanks to Chris. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. It's an axiom of all intelligence services that their failures are public and their successes are private. Even accounting for that, however, it's arguable that the CIA's ratio of disaster to triumph ill becomes the foreign intelligence service of the world's preeminent superpower. Tim Weiner's 2008 history of the CIA during the Cold War, Legacy of Ashes, was acclaimed by everyone but the CIA, who provided probably its most resonant endorsement by publicly deriding it. Tim's now written a sequel, The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century, which concentrates on the agency's extremely mixed record in the war on terror. Andrew Muller spoke to Tim Weiner earlier. He began by asking whether the CIA keeps making mistakes for the same reasons.
Intelligence work is a human endeavor and as such is prone to failure. But the trouble for the CIA today is the President of the United States is the greatest threat to American national security. He has imposed, first of all, ideological tests for promotion at the CIA. And ideology is the enemy of intelligence. If you're an ideologue, your mind is made up and you don't want to be confused with facts. Trump has a deep hatred of the CIA and indeed the entire American national security establishment, which he sees as the capital of the deep state. and he is determined to undermine it by appointing a coterie of crackpots and fools and sycophants to run American intelligence.
Has that been a commonplace, though, throughout the agency in the period covered in this book? Because there's a quote attributed to Leon Panetta, who was director at one point, where he says the intense determination to accomplish the mission influenced the judgments that were made.
Yes, that was the case where CIA invited an al-Qaeda double agent into its outpost at Khost, Afghanistan, and 7 CIA officers were killed by a suicide bomb. The mission has changed in the last 25 years. At the turn of the century, the CIA was groping for a new mission. The collapse of the Soviet Union had left it bereft. How could it be a great intelligence service without a great enemy? Then, shortly after the turn of the century, the mission became clear. It was counterterrorism. The CIA was not set up to be a paramilitary organization. Prior to the immediate aftermath of 9/11, it had never assassinated anyone. It was not set up to be a killing machine, but that is what it became. And so people who had spent the previous 15 years targeting terrorists, and by targeting, I don't mean putting warheads on foreheads, I mean identifying them and finding out everything about them so as to recruit them, if possible. They turned their talents on the Russians. They wrote a manifesto called A Call to Arms. And so the mission became penetrating the Kremlin, and it succeeded in stealing Putin's war plans for Ukraine. And, you will remember that at the end of 2021, the beginning of 2022, the United States, armed with the CIA's intelligence, tried to tell the world that Putin was about to launch a military invasion of Ukraine. And the world said, oh yeah, really? Aren't you the people who said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction? Are you quite sure about that? Well, they were right. And it didn't stop the war, but it certainly served as a unifying force to get NATO allied with the United States in trying to fight the Russians. The CIA had been essential to the survival of Ukraine ever since the Russian invasion of 2014. Well, now that mission is in great danger because the president of the United States disdains Ukraine.
Do you have a concern, though, that much as the CIA you write about in the early years of the 21st century started adjusting its findings in accordance with what they thought President George W. Bush wanted to hear, that the same thing might be going on now, especially with regard to Ukraine?
Well, the shoe is on the other foot now. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency will tailor intelligence to please the president. He has done so and will continue to do so. And you have a president who doesn't believe in intelligence. You have a Secretary of State who recently said, quote, forget about intelligence when it came to the success or lack thereof of the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. You have the president essentially keel-hauling everyone in the national security establishment who won't kowtow to him. And this is a very dangerous situation. The president has deliberately weakened the structures of American intelligence and American foreign policy at a time when the United States is gaining a lot of enemies in the world. Support for Israel, unwavering in the face of its massacre of the Palestinian people, is not endearing the United States to the nations of Islam. And one can only imagine what would happen if the United States were attacked again in days to come, at home or abroad. You have a president who openly disdains and is attempting to destroy civil liberties and democratic processes in this country. If we were hit again due to an intelligence failure, he could conceivably declare martial law. He could suspend elections. The failure of the president of the United States to heed intelligence in this instance could be disastrous on a number of fronts, foreign and domestic.
That was Pulitzer Prize winner Tim Weiner speaking to Monocle's Andrew Muller. And you can find Weiner's latest book, The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century, in bookshops from next week. You're with Monocle Radio. It is 13:39 in Bandung, 8:39 in Zurich. Indonesia's chief economic minister and lead negotiator said today that talks with senior US officials in Washington proceeded positively. The 32% tariff originally scheduled for yesterday has been postponed until August the 1st, leaving about 3 weeks for negotiations. To avoid the tariffs, Indonesia has proposed major concessions, including $34 billion in US good purchases and easing import restrictions. Meanwhile, Vietnam has already secured a tariff reduction deal, putting the spotlight on Indonesia's negotiation outcome. Well, I'm joined now by Teuku Reza Shaya, who's Associate Professor in International Relations at Pajajaran University in Bandung. Many thanks for coming on. What does positive progress actually mean?
This is a very difficult question, because from my understanding, the Indonesian negotiation team is still thinking very hard how to put this positive progress on paper. What we are doing is organizing a SWOT analysis on what best we could offer to the US. But anyway, I do not see there is a positive progress. What we are doing is hardship. We are working very hard at the moment to face the negotiation table.
So why was Indonesia subjected to a relatively high tariff rate of 32% amongst Southeast Asian countries?
It is very, very sad to see this progress here because 32 is very high. It will hamper Indonesian capacity. It will hamper Indonesian export capacity, and it will also affect Indonesian capacity to reach all ideas all ideas stipulated under the SDGs. It will also hamper Indonesian efforts to become the number 5 or number 6 in the world economy by year 2030.
So what would you say the distinctive features of Indonesia's negotiation strategy are compared to other Southeast Asian countries?
Well, I think Indonesia needs to be confident here. In this case, we need to fully utilize our status with the US as both of us have a comprehensive strategic partnership, and Indonesia is the founder of ASEAN and the biggest country inside the biggest country and the biggest economy inside ASEAN. We are the founder of Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, where the US is also there, and we have had a very long cordial relations with the US. I think this is the strong points Indonesia need to put forward.
And how important is the tariff issue for the administration, for the government?
Well, internally, it will affect the quick win of President Prabowo's programs, especially in the area of food security and energy security. And regionally, it has also caused instability inside ASEAN. ASEAN has been less cohesive at the moment, and internationally, it will affect Indonesian readiness to become a qualified middle power country sometime by 2045. So this is a very serious development in our relations with the US.
And how will this tariff issue bring changes to Indonesia's long-term strategy?
Well, in the long-term strategy, it will affect Indonesian greater commitment to be part of BRICS and also a stronger cooperation inside in the global South countries, because we are dealing with greater multipolarities while Trump is offering unipolarity. This is not good news for Indonesia and the most countries of the world.
Teuku, thank you very much indeed. That's Teuku Reza Shaya there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, it's time now to talk fashion and retail with Rebecca Tay, who's a retail expert and a brand consultant. She joins us now in the studio. Good morning to you, Rebecca.
Good morning, Georgina.
I'm just remembering how we met, which was that a very creepy driver dropped me off at your then fiancé's camp in the middle of rural Australia.
Yes, and here we are today.
And where I was staying to make a programme, which people can listen to. It's called Only in Australia. He realised that this driver was being very creepy and managed to get rid of him.
Yes. Right.
And so we spent a lot of time together chatting, and he told me about his wonderful girlfriend who was a retail expert.
Yes.
And here you are.
I know, isn't it? Small world. Strange world.
It's a very strange world. Now, let's talk about Meta, because they've just announced a $3.5 billion investment in Luxottica. Now, this is about a whole push into AI eyewear.
Yes, that's right. So EssilorLuxottica is the world's biggest eyewear brand. So they are the brand that makes Ray-Ban, Persol, Oakley. They also own all of the licenses to Chanel sunglasses, Oliver Peoples, Burberry, Coach, Michael Kors, Prada. So all of these huge brands, they're all produced by EssilorLuxottica. So Meta's investment of $3.5 billion is still under 3% of the company. So it's a huge company, but it does indicate that they are investing in AI. So in June, Oakley just launched, they're called the Oakley Meta performance glasses. So they're essentially glasses that you can watch video, you can record video, you can hear music. But the performance version, you can sort of use all of that information coming through what you're looking at to then enhance your performance.
That's extraordinary.
Yes.
A magazine editor once said to me that I should never buy expensive sunglasses. She said that the biggest markup on anything is on sunglasses.
It is.
Essentially, they're a bit of plastic, and you are paying hundreds of dollars for something that just...
100%. They will tell you, that they're made in Italy, that they're made with, all of these special kind of lenses, and there's so much innovation that goes into them, but it is a huge markup. But the Meta Ray-Bans, for example, I have tried them. They are actually quite fascinating. They're only £400, which if you look at a pair of Chanel sunglasses, and fair enough, regular Ray-Bans are about £200. So they are double the price.
Yeah.
But they are, in this day and age where we're always looking at our phones, we're holding up our phones at festivals and, restaurants. It's kind of nice to be able to take a photo without having to, point your phone in someone's face.
Well, just tell me about the experience of wearing them then.
It's quite fascinating, actually. It's sort of, you feel a little bit sneaky because you can just tap your temple and take a photo or take a video and nobody knows what you're doing. So it's a little bit sort of, you feel a bit naughty doing it. But at the same time, now having been to restaurants or Glastonbury, for example, where everyone is sort of looking up at a stage and holding their phones up, it's quite frustrating seeing that in the audience. It's nice to be able to just keep your sunglasses on and do the same thing.
Wow, how exciting. I can't wait to try. Right, now, off the back of its couture show earlier this week, Schiaparelli has announced an exhibition at the V&A.
Yes, that's right. So it's the first UK exhibition for Schiaparelli. It's quite an interesting house because it was founded in 1927, so almost 100 years ago. So it's not quite the centennial of the founding. But Elsa Schiaparelli didn't really have a background in fashion, but she was very, very involved in art. So that kind of makes sense for this exhibition. She was, she collaborated with Salvador Dali. She was friends with Man Ray, Giacometti, for example. So it's quite, it'll be an interesting exhibition. There will be over 200 pieces and objects. There's pieces like, there's this hat that looks like a shoe that's just been plonked on top of your head. There are pieces that already exist in the V&A's catalogue. So there's a skeleton dress, a tears dress, which were produced in collaboration with Dali. So a lot of kind of art and fashion pieces.
Right. Now, J.W. Anderson, the designer who's now at Dior, you'd think would be busy enough having taken on this big new job. But he has now relaunched his own eponymous label as a lifestyle brand.
Yes. Oh. It's absolutely true. I don't know if he sleeps. I don't know how he has time for all of this, but he has decided, he's sort of spent the last 11 years, he says, kind of collaborating and looking at all the craft. He's spent a lot of the time at Loewe doing this as well, and he developed the arts and crafts there. So he's relaunched his own brand, J.W. Anderson, as a lifestyle brand. So not only can you go to it for fashion, but in September, you'll also be able to find these kind of crafty pieces. So they're all generally old pieces. So there's there's sort of these 19th century French copper watering cans that he just loves. And there's a little bit of a story behind each of them. So whether it's because he just thinks that the artisanal, the artisanship or the craftsmanship that goes into it is amazing. There's these carbon steel nails, like literally nails that you use a hammer to hammer into a wall, that are made in Leicester, that he thinks are just fascinating, that were hand forged. And a lot of it is about kind of preserving the craft that goes into these pieces. Some of them are eye-wateringly expensive, so you'd be paying £50 for these 3 nails. But the idea isn't necessarily to use them; it's to sort of have a piece of them, to kind of appreciate that craft, as you will. And also, he likes this idea of kind of being able to buy a dress that's the same price and has the same value as a tea set or a chair, for example.
Well, let's talk about price and value, because, of course, the place to get things at rock-bottom prices is Costco. Yeah. Now, this is a place I've only recently discovered, and I have to say it's absolutely fascinating. They've got the most extraordinary things there, like a huge bottle of vodka made in the shape of a sailing galleon that's like, I guess, meant to be the sort of centrepiece of a Chinese restaurant. Yes. Because Costco is where sort of all the caterers and hospitality people go to buy stuff in bulk.
Yes.
Anyway, there's a reason it's hitting the headlines.
Yes, exactly. So it sounds like you're joining what's called the cult of Costco.
I think I am. I think I am.
So the cult of Costco have been in the news lately for fashion, because they have developed a few pieces that very strongly resemble pieces by Lululemon. So definitely not a Costco brand. I mean, it's this sort of kind of Lululemon has taken action against them, basically. So in the state of California, they filed a lawsuit saying that Costco has copied, and they're not just competing, but they've actually copied 3 of their key designs. So for anybody who is very into their activewear, it's the scuba hoodie, there's the Define jacket, and the ABC pant for men, which apparently are 3 of their top sellers. And they're saying that they've infringed on their trademark, the design of the pant, and an interesting thing is the trade dress protection. So it's actually kind of how they've been designed, the kind of key design elements that make them quite noticeably Lululemon. So they've taken Costco to court. Ironically, because there is this cult of Costco, it's actually sort of working in Costco's benefit, because people are going, oh, this is amazing. Actually, they are very, very similar to Lululemon's, and perhaps not as strong in the performance side, and they don't have all of the attention to detail. But as you said, people who love Costco, and you've just discovered it, people are fanatics about Costco.
Damn, though, I already bought the Lululemon version.
Yes, exactly.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. That's Rebecca Tay, retail expert and brand consultant. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. In the Netherlands, a new project is seeking to preserve something not usually found in a museum case or a national archive: nightlife. From DJs to dancers, club kids to promoters, a new initiative led by Vibeblad and podiumkunst.net is treating the country's nocturnal culture as serious cultural heritage, one worth archiving, preserving and understanding as a vital part of the Dutch identity. Well, Miles Niemeyer, a musical heritage consultant at podiumkunst.net, and Mirik Milan, nightlife advocate and Vibeblad co-founder, join me now. Miles, let's start with the big picture. Why does nightlife deserve to be archived as part of a country's cultural heritage?
Good morning, first of all. Well, I personally believe, and I think many with me, that for decades, night and club culture has shaped, art, music. We see it as a form of performing art, and I think it deserves cultural recognition. In this country, we have one of the largest conferences, or I think the largest conference on electronic dance music that has been around for, decades. I think from the early beginnings in Chicago, Detroit and New York, nightlife culture is shown to be, really strong cultural force. And, I think it's our responsibility in archival world and of heritage institutions to show that we need to preserve this before it's too late.
But I wonder, Mirak, how do you go about documenting something as fleeting and ever-changing as a night out?
Yeah, nightlife is something special. There's definitely, the way to document the night is, of course, by, taking pictures. It's, of course, by recording the DJ sets or the live performances that have taken place. But we really also would like to capture what are the rituals that are connected to this scene. And it's very important to think about how to document this, but also to give ownership to the communities that are willing to share an insight in their communal life with heritage institutions.
Miles, what do you think sets Dutch nightlife apart? Why is it special?
I think in this country we've always had a very strong ecosystem for nightlife. That we have world-renowned clubs throughout the years. So the most recently, I think this whole the school is a very great example of this. Closed down 2 years ago. People have traveled from all over the world to experience it because it is a very special place where art, visual art, but also very well-renowned DJs came and played there. But it was there was a no photograph policy, and so what they did instead of archiving in the traditional sense is that they created the world's first DJ audio archive called The Archive, and if you listen back to all the recordings, you kind of get a feel of why it was special because it's kind of there are no compromises. I think it's worth. I think it's worth listening to. Yeah.
And Mirak, you've been deep in this world for decades. What were some of the most surprising or entertaining stories that came out during this research?
So, as a long-standing nightlife promoter in Amsterdam, and of course also as the former night mayor of Amsterdam, we strongly believe that this report and this research really shines a light also on marginalized voices, because often the most commercial the most commercial and successful stories are pulled out, and we really want to focus on lesser known regions, enforcing a perspective that also has changeover light and really shining a light on these pioneers. So there's many great stories, obviously, from nightlife. I think we often like to refer to night culture because it sets a little bit the difference between there's really people performing, there's people developing their talents, and that's what I think the value of night culture is the talent development that's happening for DJs, VJs, artists, everybody that works in that creative cultural scene. So that's really what I think the real value of nightlife is. But amazing stories, for example, we have a project which is actually from the UK, a case study, which is it's called Rendezvous Projects from East London, and it's really by working with schools and community groups and also residents. It really, uncovers the history, and really shows underrepresented voices, fostering connections, but also share the pride what this nightlife brings. So I think to go in detail, I can say, when the beat kicked in or whatnot, but that's difficult, and that's why it's also we're trying to find, what's the tight balance to archiving something, making it visible, making sure that people, it also builds self-esteem and it gives recognition for the social cultural changes a community or a scene has given to society.
Mirek, thank you. That's Mirek Milan and Miles Niemeyer there talking to us about Dutch nightlife. And that's all we have time for on today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Anita Riotta, Hassan Anderson and Ryuma Takahashi, our researcher, Henry King, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing will be live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.